you as chief of police have made public statements confirming that transparency is important, right?
Yes.
Have you retained all of your communication since becoming chief of police?
Object to form foundation. Go ahead.
No.
Have any of your communication records between yourself and Mayor Keller have been retained?
No.
Can you explain why not?
They're no different than conversations.
And it's your contention conversations are not subject to IPRA?
Unless it's going to result in some kind of directive or some kind of order that's coming out from the police department.
What authority are you relying on for that conclusion?
Object to the form. Go ahead.
I don't understand what authority.
Are you just making up that standard?
No,
or is it
I think
something
it
you're
comes
relying
back.
on?
It comes back to transitory information.
So your contention as the chief of police that when you're having conversations with the mayor that's documented in a text message, that's not subject to IPRA?
Object to form foundation.
Yes.
Go ahead.
Okay.
I think that when you combine the two, you recognize that it's saying non-records don't need to be retained, and on this one it says at executive level they do.
Right.
So there is a conflict between the two. Am I reading that wrong?
I think you are.
Earlier today, I released a video showing the deposition of the mayor of Albuquerque, New Mexico, in which he admitted to tampering with public records. More specifically, he admitted to not retaining text messages between him and the chief of police. For anybody who's ever had a cell phone, you know that your phone automatically saves all of your messages. And in order for these messages to not be retained, you have to intentionally and willfully go in and delete them. There are some people who will set their devices to automatically delete messages after 6 months, a year, 2 years, or whatever it is. But even that takes a conscious effort for you to go into your device and tell your device to delete messages at certain points. So the point is, if text messages are missing, they don't just go missing. Somebody has to physically go in and intentionally remove them, delete them. So the deposition released earlier today was the mayor of Albuquerque, Tim Keller, admitting to failing to retain his text messages between himself and Chief of Police Harold Medina. This video is the deposition of Chief Medina on the same matter. In this deposition, attorney Tom Grover establishes that Chief Medina did attend the training classes that taught him that his text messages between him and the mayor are public record and that they are to be retained indefinitely. And as we established in the previous video, tampering with public records is a 4th-degree felony. Links to the previous video as well as the statutes on this are in the description below. Have you guys ever wondered what happened to the legendary Chuck Norris? Well, I recently saw a video he made and I was shocked. He's in his 80s now, still kicking butt, working out, and staying active. What's even more shocking is that he's stronger, can work out longer, and still has energy left for his grandkids. He did this by making just one change, and he says he still feels like he's in his 50s. His wife even started doing this one thing, and she says she's never felt better. She says she feels 10 years younger, her body is leaner, and she has energy all day. Chuck made a video that explains everything. Make sure you watch it by going to chuckdefense.com/James or by clicking the link below in this video. This will change the way you think about your health. Once again, that's chuckdefense.com/James and click the link in the description below to watch the video now. The legendary Chuck Norris is a whopping 81 years old, and yet he has more energy than me. He discovered that he could make dramatic changes to his health by simply focusing on 3 things that sabotage our bodies as we age. Watch his method by clicking the link in the description below. That's chuckdefense.com/James.
As a general principle, would you agree with me that transparency of government actions is important?
Yes.
Object to form.
Oh, I'm sorry.
It's okay.
In fact,
Slow down.
you as chief of police have made public statements confirming, I'll hand you what's marked as Exhibit 6, and this is a quote by you that was screenshotted out of an article. The quote is, "Transparency with the police department, ownership of situations by the Albuquerque Police Department. As interim chief, I will take ownership for anything that's occurred that may have been in my span of control or not in my span of control," correct?
Yes.
Do you recall what you were making that statement in response to?
No.
What was the period of time by which you were the interim chief? Approximately.
October 1st to March 15th.
Do you feel like prior to you becoming the interim chief that the police department had challenges with transparency?
Object to form and foundation. Go ahead.
I think we had a lot of challenges in terms of taking ownership for what we should have taken ownership for.
Why would transparency be important for law enforcement in particular?
To give the public as much information.
So, like, what type of information? What does transparency mean to you?
Like, one example I would use is an officer-involved shooting. Speaking, releasing video when it's appropriate, explaining the situation. Another example is like when we've had officers either who do something that's criminal and us letting the public know that we've done that we've made a criminal referral. Schemes is a good example. I think if you go back and you look in the media, months ago we said we said that there was he was being terminated for the Target case, and then he got charged recently by the AG's office. So there's just numerous examples of when we could be transparent.
Do you think disclosing officer disciplinary files supports transparency?
Object to form and foundation.
I think that it depends. And I think this is one of those tough questions is like, there are times when public needs and the magnitude of the situation would warrant the releasing of information in terms of what the final outcome of discipline was. But I don't think we just regularly turn over files to the public.
As a matter of like an affirmative action by the department?
Like, what do you mean?
Like on its own action, just proactively releasing officer discipline records?
Like in what term?
Like-
I'm sorry, I'm not understanding now.
So let me go back to my question. Is releasing the disciplinary records of officers consistent with department transparency from your point of view?
Like, what do you mean by disciplinary? Just the actions itself, like somebody was suspended or part of the investigation?
No, the final discipline upon a given officer.
The final discipline, yes.
You think that's consistent with transparency?
Yes.
Okay. And then what about the investigation relating to the basis for that discipline?
I think there's parts that could be released. There's portions. You have to look at the case in its entirety to see what you can release and what you can't.
Okay. So it's not a hard no, but it's not a blanket yes.
It's not a blanket yes. There
Okay.
are limitations.
Okay. So you mentioned releasing videos of officer-involved shootings. So would you agree with me that transparency means producing to the public records concerning government business?
Object to form. Go ahead.
Yes, in ways. I think it's really hard to answer general questions. Like I can't answer a general question. You'd have to say like, be specific, and I could answer it.
Well, what do you think the term government business means?
Government business can mean a lot of different things.
Okay. What does it not mean?
It doesn't mean that every single conversation amongst individuals or every single written document in certain forms are government businesses that should be released.
And who defines or sets that standard?
I think that standard is set through our IPRA legislation and laws.
Okay, the state legislation.
Yes.
Okay. Have you received any training on city public records?
Yes.
Object to form.
Oh,
Go ahead.
sorry
It's
about
okay.
Yes.
What training have you received?
We've had briefings from Ethan Watson on records. Like over the years, there's been a lot. Like, how long do you retain a certain record? And there's just, we've The most recent training we've gotten is like training about what we retain and what we don't.
And Ethan Watson is the city clerk, right?
Yes.
Okay. Are you aware of a PowerPoint presentation Ethan Watson or his office gives to city employees regarding records retention?
Yes, I believe he's given that to us.
Have you attended that?
Yes.
Okay. I'll hand you Exhibit 7, and this is the first slide and one slide from Mr. Watson's APRA records retention. And page 28 is a section that talks about records retention. Do you recall this slide being addressed when you were in attendance at his training?
No.
So in this slide, Mr. Watson asserts that for correspondences involving executive level personnel, that being administrative or general management, that the retention period is in fact permanent. There is no period by which it lapses. Did you know that?
Yes.
I'm sorry?
For the retention of documents that are required to be retained?
Yeah.
Yes.
And what he identifies are internal and external communications and related records to or from executive level personnel, including but not limited to directives and not identified in other classifications. Do you see that?
Yes.
It's a pretty broad application of records. Would you agree with that?
Yes.
Is there anything in here that identifies exceptions to the type of communication records that this does not apply to?
What Ethan Watson has told me is drafts are one exemption.
Okay.
Transitory information, which is just basic conversation, that is, and the dumb way I understand that is what would have been a phone call between two individuals, and that if and I think the most important thing is, and there's some pages in here that are missing that I think put a lot of context to this, but if a written document is produced as a result of the conversations, that the final product is what needs to be retained.
What authority are you relying on that says draft documents are not subject to these retention considerations?
Object to form.
That's what I understood Ethan's explanation to us was.
Do you know if he described those documents as something called non-records?
I don't recall.
From this same PowerPoint, I'm going to put a slide in front of you. I don't have additional copies, but we'll make them during a break. But I want you to look at it. This identifies non-records that Mr. Watson identifies in his PowerPoint presentation. Do you see that? And is his identification of non-records consistent with your understanding
Yes.
that you just testified to?
Yeah, I think that sampling letters would be drafts.
Right. That's his contention. Is that correct?
Yes.
Sample letters, extra copies of documents kept solely for convenience of reference, right? And then you said transitory records, right? What are transitory records?
You know, I think I spoke about it earlier, like the dum-dum version is the conversations, basic conversations that are a phone call. I mean, and the best thing to talk about is, like, I think text messages are a really good example of that. Is it just an extension of a conversation?
Okay. You would agree with me, though, that there are different standards as far as what's put forward in Mr. Watson's PowerPoint as far as communications between executive level personnel and other personnel, right?
Object to form. Go ahead.
Would have to see the rest of his PowerPoint.
Well, look at this one slide. He's identifying that for executive level personnel, internal and external communications are subject to permanent retention, right?
Yeah, it appears that he's saying in that one slide.
Do you have any reason to believe there are slides that are in conflict with this slide?
Well, I think 21.
Well, it says
Brings-
non-records, right?
This says non-records.
Right.
So I think that when you combine the two, you recognize that it's saying non-records don't need to be retained. And on this one, it says at executive level, they
Right.
do. So there is a conflict between the two. Am I reading that wrong?
I think you are, because he's just identifying these non-records that there's no retention period, right?
Okay. Then I'm good then.
Okay.
Here's your
We'll make a copy of this. Incorporate it one way or the other. Have you retained all of your communications since becoming chief of police?
Object to form foundation. Go ahead.
No.
Have you preserved any of your communication records since becoming chief of police?
Yes.
What records have you retained?
Every special order, every final draft document is retained.
Have any of your communication records between yourself and Mayor Keller have been retained?
No.
Can you explain why not?
If they're no different than conversations,
And it's your contention conversations are not subject to IPRA?
unless it's going to result in some kind of directive or some kind of order that's coming out from the police department.
What authority are you relying on for that conclusion?
Object to the form. Go ahead.
I don't understand what authority.
Are you just making up that standard?
No,
or is there
I
something
think
you're
it comes
relying
back. It comes back to transitory information.
on? So your contention as the chief of police that when you're having conversations with the mayor that's documented in a text message, that's not subject to IPRA?
Object to form foundation.
Yes.
Go ahead.
Okay. But you would agree that memos and reports, special orders, those are all public records, correct?
Yes.
You're just admitting that there's a disagreement as to whether or not transitory records such as a text message between you and the mayor are not public records?
Yes.
Okay. Do you have a work cell phone?
Yes.
What is the phone number?
505-401-0787.
And do you have a personal cell phone number?
Yes.
Are the last four digits of that number 9657?
Yes.
And you've testified earlier that you've exchanged text messages with Tim Keller, is that right?
Yes.
How often do you think you exchange text messages with him?
Sometimes we exchange a text here daily. I have a weekly meeting, so we just don't sit and text each other. I have 2 weekly meetings with him.
But do you frequently, like on a weekly basis, exchange text messages?
Oh, I would say during the course of a week, he'll ask me questions.
Okay.
Or
But weekly is a fair characterization.
Guys, I don't know. I'm conflicted. I don't know if this chief of police is really this stupid or if he's just pretending. But at any rate, if you or I committed a 4th-degree felony, I don't think the government would care at all whether we committed it out of ignorance or whether we did it intentionally and maliciously. I think that would be completely irrelevant if you or I committed a felony.